Hi everyone, so this is my third video in a series of videos about the basics of Ableton, particularly in this case the arrange window, or the arrange view it's called in Ableton. This video is going to focus on using MIDI instruments, or software instruments as they're called, as a way of creating sound in Ableton. As we learned previously, there are really two ways of creating sound in Ableton. Well, there are more, but and specifically, we're talking about MIDI tracks versus audio tracks. Audio tracks simply play any recording or fragment of a recording that you drop in the arrange window. A MIDI track is a more complicated, in some ways, track where you have a virtual instrument plugged into the track, and then instead of an audio clip, you're going to have a MIDI clip that has MIDI data. If you make a new MIDI track, it will say MIDI above it or on the track. If you make an audio track, it's going to say audio. But that is not always the case. I mean, you're not going to always see that. If tracks are named, you may not know that they are MIDI or audio. If they do not have any sort of plugin in them, a MIDI track is going to have this little dotted line here, which kind of indicates actually MIDI signal coming in. But in this case, without an instrument plugged into the channel strip or the track itself, it's not going to make any sound. When we look at Ableton's instruments, this is where we're going to find Ableton's instrument set. And, you know, this is a massive list here. And a lot of these are actually combinations of other things. They're different synthesizers, but there is a core group of instruments that I would say you should think about in terms of Ableton Suite. So this is really the core list of instruments in Ableton, minus these two at the bottom, which are VSTs. These are separate sounds that I purchased myself, or separate synthesizers. So we have collision, we have drift, we have the drum sampler. Operator is a very powerful and useful synthesizer. It's kind of like the bread and butter, I would say, of kind of classic synthesis. We have the sampler and the simpler, which are essentially MIDI instruments that function to play audio files. We have tension, which is a modeling kind of synthesizer, along with collision is another kind of modeling synthesizer. Collision in this case kind of models the sound of hitting hammers, hitting mallets, hitting metal, kind of things colliding, or any sort of percussion striking. And then we have a wavetable synthesizer, which is kind of a classic synthesizer in recent history, since the mid 2000s or early 2000s, when some synthesizers like Massive and Serum have come out that use wavetables to create sound. The first thing I need to do, of course, is add a synthesizer to a track in some way. Now, there are several ways of doing this. One of them is to select the track and then drag the synthesizer down into the drop instrument or sample here area, which is called the channel strip. I can also drag and drop it onto the track, and it will add it at the bottom. If I want to make a new track with Operator, I can drag it into empty space here, and it will make a new track and call it Operator, as you can see over here on the left. Anyway, so that is how you add a synthesizer. Now, if I want to hear this synthesizer make sound, there are several ways. Obviously, first of all, I have to have this track armed, right? So with the track arm button on, I'm going to hear this. Now, that's only if I want to play it with some sort of MIDI keyboard. So if I have a MIDI keyboard set up, I should now be able to play the synthesizer with this MIDI keyboard. I can't, if I have MIDI data in here, obviously it's going to play that MIDI data regardless of whether it's record armed or not. Arming the track is required for you to play a synthesizer or use a MIDI keyboard to play that track. And you know, you have to, that's something to be really careful of, because you, for instance, might have the wrong track armed and you think you're hearing this track, but really we're hearing this one up here. And I could have drift on there, for example. I think I'm on Operator, but really I'm hearing drift because that's the track that's armed. So just something to keep in mind. Once the track is record armed, I can record fairly easily just by using the record button up here. Now, one of the first things that's going to happen is it's going to count off if count off is turned on. So count off, of course, is over here by the metronome. This is the metronome. And if I go to the little pull down menu just to the right of it, count on in right now is set to 1 bar. I can set it to 2 bars or 4 bars or no bars, but it's basically going to count in 1 bar in this case. And what that's going to do, of course, is give me 4 beats in 4/4 time before it starts to record. So, and if I want to have, another thing is that the metronome right now is off. If the metronome is off, I'm only going to hear those 4 count ins and then the metronome will stop. So you keep that in mind when you're recording. If you don't have any rhythmic elements already, you probably need the metronome to give you some sort of rhythm. So I'm going to turn the metronome on and then record in this track of operator. Now let me get something a little bit different, more interesting in operator. I'm going to go to the operator, pull down the operator tab here and choose synth keys. So I have chosen a synth over here under the synth keys and under operator. So I have operator selected, then under synth keys, I've chosen this one called Dirty Pulse, which has a really nice pulse wave. And you can see down at the bottom, it doesn't look like operator. And the reasoning for that is that this is basically, the synthesizer sound you're hearing is a collective, it's a collective synth. It's grouped together in this kind of nice package. If I want to see the whole, basically the effects chain, I can click on this button. It will open operator. And then you can see operator, in addition to a reverb and a chorus, are being used to make this sound. And again, these are actually effects I can add. So you can see over here, there's reverb and there's chorus. And if I turn the reverb and chorus up, it will add reverb and chorus. And that's probably where what these effects out here are doing. So I can now record in here. I'm just going to close that back again and record some sound. I have my metronome on. I'm going to hit the record button up here and I'll be off and running. I recorded a simple little passage here. Now, some notes, I actually don't have a MIDI keyboard. I'm using the keyboard on the computer. I don't have a MIDI keyboard right in front of me. So I am going to just change a couple notes here. I don't like that last note I played. I'm going to turn it up to a D. Now, all I have to do is just grab this note and use the up arrow, and it's going to change that note to a D. And then over here, you can see I tried to play a D, but that note was missing. So I'm going to option drag this note over and basically duplicate it, just like you would duplicate a clip or some kind. So let's hear what this sounds like now. It's a 2-bar or a 4-bar loop. So if I can loop this. So this will just loop forever. Now you'll notice, you might hear from the metronome that my tempo or my timing is a tiny bit off in places, and you can see that here. So this note, for instance, is not lining up exactly with this bar. Now sometimes that doesn't matter, sometimes it does. It's called quantization to correct these errors. So right now the grid is set up to show me quarter notes. And wait, is that true? No, it's showing me eighth notes because I have beat 1 here of the measure, and then beat 2 is way over here. So it's showing me the 16th notes. If I right click in here, I can go down here and choose eighth notes, and now it's only showing the eighth notes. And as you can see, I actually attempted to play something in eighth notes in this music. So if I wanted to correct this so that it matched the grid, all I would need to do is Command A to select everything, and then I can right click in here or use Command U to quantize. And that's going to force every note onto the actual beat so that now the rhythm is going to be absolutely perfect. Now again, I don't want to say that you should do this. Sometimes it's totally appropriate to not quantize your music. But in this case, if you want to, that's how you would do it, to get those notes in the correct place. Now you'll see too, every single note is dead on that line and is going to be correct tempo-wise. So down here in the main window for what's called the piano roll of this MIDI clip, I can do a lot to change these notes. The first thing is that you'll notice my cursor is an arrow right now. If I hit the B key, B, it's going to turn into a pencil. And those are essentially the only two tools that I really use down here in the editing window. If I have the pencil tool, I can actually draw more notes if I want. And if I want to hear those notes sounding, I need to turn on this button right here, which is the little headphones. Turn that on is going to now sound the notes out that I play. So you may or may not want that on, it just depends. So if I want to lasso things, grab a bunch of notes, if I want to move notes around, I'm going to use the arrow. So I will toggle the B key again to switch between the pencil and the arrow. And you know, as I said, like I can select these notes, duplicate them, Command D, just like you would a MIDI clip or an audio clip. I can do the exact same thing down here. I can also use the up and down arrows to move all of the notes. So imagine I want to move all of this up a second. I can Command A to select all the notes and then just use the up arrow and move all the notes to D. So now you can see they're all starting on D, and it's going to play D, the same notes, or not the same notes, the same intervals between every note, the same chords essentially. So that's the basic editing of MIDI down here. Now there are a couple of other features that are kind of useful and interesting. These are things I never use, but you could use them. I just learned about them this week. So the scale thing, especially for if you're a non-musician, it might be a really useful tool in conjunction with some changes you can make over here. So if I turn on scale and I set this, for instance, to C minor, if I go to C minor, oh, sorry, I moved all these notes to D. So let me actually choose D major. D major at the very top. So you'll notice now in my window here, it's showing me the notes of D major in the piano roll. The ones with the purple highlight on them are the notes of D major. I can go even further than this and turn on the highlight key, and now you can see the MIDI window kind of extends that purple line out to show you the notes in the chords. So now I could do all kinds of things. I can actually see the notes. In addition to that, if I hit the scale key, it's now going to only show me the notes of D major. Now this assumes that all the notes I played are in D major. If they weren't, then it will change it. But so this is a great way, for instance, if you don't really know scales and don't really understand music, you could just set this to D minor or whatever, and then turn on scale, and then you know you're only going to see notes inside that those chords. So you technically can't really even get it wrong, right? You can't really play a wrong note. Anything in this key is going to sound nice in a lot of situations. So anyways, I'll turn that off. But I can also, you know, if we go back up here to the clip, these clips behave exactly the same way an audio clip does. I can Command D to duplicate it. I can extend this out to add more if I want to add more music to the loop or to the clip. I can select part of it down here. Let me turn automation off. I can select part of it down at the bottom here. And for instance, option drag that over here, or drag this down to a new track. I can do all kinds of things just like I could with audio with a MIDI clip. So you'll see that if I highlight this clip, also down here, I can change the start and end if I want. In this case, I can also add measures. So the end, well, really what I'm adding measures here. If I really want to make it longer, I can go down here to length and change this to an 8, for example, to double the length of that MIDI clip. Now, right now, it's only showing the first 8 or 4 bars, but I could now extend this out to make it longer. Anyway, so that's the basics of MIDI editing. It's a pretty simple thing. I can change notes. I can do whatever I want. It's really very flexible. Lots of interesting things to do with MIDI. So let's now talk about using the drum rack, which is essentially how drums are managed as a MIDI instrument in Ableton. So if I wanted to use create drums, I'm going to use something called the drum rack. And the drum rack is essentially, if I go to synths, actually I don't have it in my synths tab. If I go to live, it'll be here. So the drum rack is right here. It's just an awesome tool. And I'm going to drag this into empty space down here to create a new track with the drum rack on it. So this is what the drum rack looks like. It's essentially, these are the MIDI keyboard notes down at the bottom, and you can see I can change octaves here to see different areas of the keyboard. And essentially, it allows me to play audio files on the MIDI keyboard. And you could do this, I mean, you can use a drum rack to play anything. It doesn't have to be a drum. It's just basically a multi-sampler instrument. And this is kind of the standard way that a lot of drums are played, or way drums are looped or created with MIDI, is using some sort of drum rack-ish kind of thing. So I'm going to go over to my drum one-shots here and click on kicks and, whatever. Just kind of drag something. So you just click and drag this down and drop it on the drum rack. And now on C1, I will have a kick drum. So there's my kick drum. If I wanted to add a snare drum, I could go to, whatever, snares, rim shots. I really like these. I use these all the time. And now I have a snare. So I'm going to go up here to hi-hats. Let's grab 4 hi-hats. So we have some variation. I can drop these 2 anywhere I want. I'm just going to drop all 4 of them at once, just like that. And now I can construct a drum beat by creating a MIDI clip and using it. So the way I create a MIDI clip in the window up at the top is to select the area, right click, and say insert empty MIDI clip. And you can see also it's Shift Command M. So I now have a MIDI clip here. If I double click on it, you can see at the bottom, it shows me all of the drum samples. My kick is at the bottom, my rim shot, and my hi-hats. So if I wanted to, I can now record a drum beat, right, using a MIDI keyboard, playing those specific notes. Or I could just go right in here. Let's make a little, just a 1-bar loop, right? I'm going to loop this. Put my kick drums in here, right? And then add my snares. Now this is just going to loop over and over, and I can add more notes as it goes. Oh, let me solo this. So it's a basic drum beat, and now if I want to, I could add some hi-hats. Just kind of click in here. Kind of a funky rhythm. It's not really very 4/4-ish. But I might want to turn down these hi-hats. So this gets to another thing about the velocity of our notes. You can see as I made the notes here, all of the velocities defaulted to 100 because I just clicked in the windows and made these notes. Now I'm going to command drag this down to soften these notes. And I might actually just soften some of them. Maybe I'll have the downbeats of every beat be louder. Variation in velocity is incredibly satisfying, and it really makes it sound way more organic. I'm going to turn my kick up to full volume and maybe leave my snares in the middle. So I have a very simple little drum beat that I made using the drum rack. And you can see too, if I go over to the channel strip here, you'll see these drums playing as they go. Now you'll notice these are all different audio files, which is really cool and incredibly powerful because, for instance, I like my snare drum. Maybe I'm going to add a reverb to it. So I'm going to go over here and grab the hybrid reverb. I'm going to drop it in here. I'll explain this later, but it needs to be right up next to this audio file. And now my snare, because that's what's selected, the rim shot, is going to have reverb. Let's turn the decay down. So if I wanted to, for instance, maybe now turn this into a 4-bar loop, I could just grab this, hit duplicate, select all 4 bar, or sorry, not a 4-bar loop, a 2-bar loop. And then if I want to combine these, I just select both of them and hit Command J, or it's also called consolidate. So if I consolidate those 2 MIDI clips, they're now going to be one long MIDI clip. And this is, I do this all the time in my own composing, kind of just rearrange things so that they're not the same. Maybe at the end here, I want to have a little bit of a fill. So I'm going to change up my drum beat a little bit. Maybe we'll do this. Let's hear how that sounds. So you can hear now I've created a 4-bar loop or 2-bar loop that has a slightly different ending than the first one and just has a different the second measure here sounds different. So that is the basics of using MIDI in Ableton. It's incredibly, so I do want to point one thing out too. If I wanted to use, there are a lot of amazing prefab drum kits in here that you can use. And all you have to do is go over here to the drums tab and then select one of these kits. So, and again, if this little microphone, or sorry, headphone icon is turned on, you're going to hear a sample of of basically what this kit is capable of. So if and you can see like these say 64 pad, that means there's 64 different samples in here. Or like a Core 808 kit, right? Core 606, 80, here's a Core 808 kit. So let's drag this into empty space and just show you what that looks like. So this again is kind of a mixture. It's an instrument, kind of a group thing here, where we have the drums here, these individual drum sounds. Oh, and the reason I'm not hearing that is because this track is soloed. So let me solo the drum kit, and now I should hear these. But I also have some control over them. So you can see over here, these are some presets actually. So if I click on these, you can see it's going to change these presets. If I want something to be, loud or whatever, I have lots of choices here. But there are many, many drum kits here that you can choose from. So if I go to double click on one of these, it'll replace the 808 kit. And now I have this pad kit special down here that actually has a lot of samples. It has 32 samples in it. And it's all sorts of different sounds. Now, one thing I do want to point out, the last thing I want to point out here, is that if you choose any prefab drum kit, let's go back here to the special kit. Let me make a new MIDI clip. Insert MIDI clip. The general sound of individual notes is always going to be in the same place. C1 is going to always be a kick drum. D is always going to be a snare. These are almost always snares. Then there's a secondary kick on F. And then the toms are always on G and A and B. And then we always have our hi-hats. And F sharp is always a closed hi-hat on every kit. And then you have other hi-hats. And then the crash cymbals. So the nice thing is that I can take a drum beat that I made. So for instance, let me drag this down here. Now this is not probably going to... Yeah, this is kind of a mess because these notes are now not in the right place. Let me put my snares in the right place and then move all these hi-hats to the hi-hat tracks. And I don't want all those open hi-hats. So let me move these down there. And then maybe I'll make these on the open hi-hat. So you can hear now, I've basically taken my drum beat and put it on has a different kit entirely, right? And I could, again, do the same thing. Now that I have this kit kind of in the right place, these notes in the right place, and I should now hear my drum beat similar, but new samples. It's not exactly the same, but it's close. You know, or we could pick a different kit from here. I don't know, whatever. Let's choose something funky. So that's kind of a weird kit. The snares, actually not really snares. There we go. And you'll notice too, my kit here, there is no A sharp and G sharp in this kit. So these notes are just not sounding. So anyways, but there's lots of flexibility with the drum kits, with the drum, like the drum rack is such an excellent tool for making beats and doing all kinds of stuff. I use it all the time, honestly, for other things too, for just triggering samples of all kinds. I use the drum rack because it basically is similar to the sampler. It'll turn anything into